The great poet Shevchenko dreamt of living in these places of extraordinary beauty. But the soaring spirit of freedom did not let man take possession over these lands. Now its rightful inhabitants reign here, animals and birds. Kaniv Nature Reserve, one of the oldest, stretches across Cherkasy region, is located in the very heart of Ukraine. Founded almost a century ago, it still remains a treasure trove of many secrets and discoveries. Mountains that resemble canyons, gullies, creeks, and neighboring steppe islets can all be found along the right bank of the majestic Dnipro. The Kaniv Nature Reserve, founded in 1923, took the unique landscape that contains artifacts from the Paleolithic under its protection. Most of the protected lands stretches across large hills. The highest peak, Porta Yasuhara, rises 140 meters above the Dnipro. The inclination of certain regions reaches 30 to 45 degrees. These slopes are very steep. They can only be used in agriculture for a year, 2 at the most, because then comes intensive erosion, loss of fertility, and unprofitability of such lands.
Далі інтенсивний розмив, втрата родючості ґрунту і нерентабельність використання таких земель.
On the other hand, the creation of a reserve here, the preservation of forests, and gradual rehabilitation of forest complexes in these territories has shown significant improvement in the rejuvenation of these parts.
Дає досить хороші показники оздоровлення цих місць.
The undergrowth of dense young forest assumes the most awkward positions, adapting to the movement of the earth, which creeps slowly downhill. When snow begins to thaw, streams of water will flow along the ravines, cutting through the Kaniv Mountains. When it rains, the barely noticeable streams turn into fierce streams that can sweep away any obstacle in their way. By washing gullies and creeks deeper and deeper, water leaves formations that resemble canyons. An equally breathtaking view opens up from the top of the hills, the so-called Kaniv Mountains. This section of the Dnipro, with numerous shallows and sandy streamers, flows in its natural course. The floodplain islands of Kruhlik and Shelestiv, which survived the Kaniv Reservoir flooding, just like Snake Island, have also become part of the reserve. Some legends need to be studied and others refuted. When the reservoirs were at the design stage, it was planned that large areas would be flooded. But rising water did not flood a 100-hectare piece of land, which remained above the water level. The Kaniv Reservoir took several years to fill. Escaping from the water element, a large number of reptiles made their way to the remaining land areas. Thus, Snake Island appeared with its slithering inhabitants. No matter how much man tried to harness the river by changing its regime and flooding the plain with its numerous inhabitants, birdsong doesn't stop here. A large discharge of water flow due to the operation of hydroelectric power stations causes fluctuations in the water level. Ice breaks and is then carried away by the current, leaving parts of the river exposed. And since both golden eyes and mergus are fish-eating species, what matters most for them is that the water is open. They can easily survive the cold when there is food. With the coming of the first thaw, birds become more active. Titmouse song is not the only manifestation of that. Dnipro waterfowl also welcomed the first rays of sun. Mallards quack, golden eyes join them, and mergus whistle in the air. This entire bird kingdom keeps flying back and forth, anticipating the passing of the cold winter. When it comes to birds that come to winter here, everyone usually names bullfinches, waxwings, and redpolls. Most other species, including some ducks, fly to the south. Goldeneye and mergus spend the winter here. You can see whole flocks of them near the Dnipro. Moreover, the goldeneye is a rare species listed in the Red Book of Ukraine. In more than 30 years of bird watching at the Kaniv Reserve, Vitaly Nikolaevich Hrishchenko has noticed that the number of wintering species has doubled. After a cascade of reservoirs was created, sea inhabitants started flocking to the Dnipro's banks. The yellow-footed martin was a typical seabird, but now they've settled all over the Dnipro. They nest in inland waters. Due to the climate becoming warm, many species prefer their native lands for winter. Ducks like the widgeon are, as a rule, on their own in a warm period, but when it gets cold, they seek support from their brethren when wintering on the local banks. It is also a place for winter to the largest predator, the white-tailed eagle. We had up to 30 of them some winters. There are just 17 of them this year. The winter is not as harsh, so they have scattered and they live at distant ponds. The eagles flock back to the reserves when their hunting grounds are covered in ice. But there is always open water here, so they can always count on a successful hunt. Two mallards, a couple. Long-term bird watching led the scientists to draw some interesting conclusions. It turns out that birds are able to change the habits developed by the long experience of their ancestors. Global warming affected the timing of the return of many species in spring, even those that have just moved to these places and began to nest. Great cormorants first made their nests here in 1999. Then they flew back in March. Then they started coming here earlier and earlier, and now they're the first to appear. Cormorants are the heralds of spring on the Dnipro. They arrive in early February, as soon as it starts getting warm, and stay here for a long while. These parts are unique, both with their natural wealth and ancient prehistoric finds. The Nature Museum of Kaniv Reserve contains artifacts that date back to 3 to 7 centuries BC.
І ще раніше, за декілька десятиліть до того часу, коли був створений Канівський природний заповідник.
Historical and archaeological monuments were found here several decades before the reserve was founded. They dated back to the ancient historical times of 4th century BC, when Scythian tribes dominated on this territory.
4 століття до нашої ери. Це час, коли на цій території панували скіфи-землероби. В кінці 19 століття на пагорбі, який височіє над музеєм природи і називається Мале Скіфське городище.
Academic Mykola Fedotovich Bielashevsky unearthed a small Scythian settlement.
Укріплене поселення скіфів-землеробів.
The excavations of the ancient Ruthenian city of Roden ended up being much more significant. Back then, Jewish jewelers of Kaniv began getting old Slavic golden coins and jewelry. Academic Bielashevsky was interested in the origin of those valuables. It turned out that those were the find of locals who found them under Knyazha Hora.
коли в кінці 19 століття тут були великі дощі.
In the late 19th century, there were heavy rains and floods here, deep gullies were washed out, and large masses of soil slid into the Dnipro.
Внаслідок тих чи інших природних умов.
The mountain had lost part of its treasure when the scientist began his excavations. Bilaszewski made a true discovery only after digging deeper. He found remains of buildings and buried defenders of the fortress who died a violent death, judging by their poses. Over 3,000 archaeological finds were recovered, including 12 treasures with gold and silver items of exquisite craftsmanship.
Про Княжу гору можна сказати, що це фортеця.
Kaniv Reserve is a typical feudal fortress which existed up to the early 13th century. It was most likely one of the outposts of the Kievan Rus period, which were built along the Dnipro.
Форпостів доби Київської Русі по Дніпру, які існували.
At the beginning of the last millennium, Kaniv Reserve was a formidable, inaccessible cape over the Dnipro and Ros. Cut off from both sides by ravines, it served as a natural defensive fortress. Archaeologists were able to recreate the approximate look of Kaniv Reserve and the city of Roden. It was only possible to capture these fortifications via a sudden assault during the first wave of the Mongol Tatar invasion. The city was burned down completely and never restored. Only archaeological digs done by academic Bilaszewski shed some light on its history. Soviet scientist Rybakov called it the city of God on earth, the cult of the soul god Rod, since our Slav ancestors knew him as the great creator of the world and considered him to be the one who created this earth. His central pantheon was only supposed to be located in a sacred place.
Місцях доволі сакральних.
Today, forest lands are located in place of the gigantic feudal fortress built in the traditions of European castles. The once spacious top of Kaniv Reserve is now split across and along with ravines. Only a narrow path leads there now, while a wide dirt road led to the city in 11th to 13th centuries. Kaniv Reserve was never renamed. People have kept its original purpose for millennia, a city of princes and nobles, considering this to be a special place with clean air and an immense skyline. When one can see the largest constellations, these places still contain plenty of secrets and mysteries.